My name is George Thompson. I'm 72 years old. A retired electrician who spent his entire life building homes for other families while dreaming of one day having a peaceful place of my own. A home where my children and future grandchildren could visit freely. A dream, I thought, I achieved when I bought the small but beautiful two-story house in Ohio that became my pride and joy. The house I eventually let my son, his wife, and their 2 kids move into when times got financially tough for them. A decision I now realize was the beginning of a painful chapter I never saw coming. A chapter that began with subtle disrespect, small dismissive comments, and then one morning turned into something so absurd, so shocking, that even now I still shake my head at how far things escalated. It started the day my daughter-in-law Melanie stood in front of me with her arms crossed and said, "George, we need you to stop using the living room. It's too crowded when you're out here." And for a moment, I honestly thought I'd misheard her because no one had ever spoken to me like that in my own home, the home I worked 40 years to buy, the home my late wife decorated lovingly, the home where my kids learned to walk, laugh, fight, play, and grow. When her words registered, I blinked and asked calmly, "Excuse me?" And she repeated herself, slower this time, as if she were talking to a child, saying, "From now on, the living room is just for us. You can stay in your room or use the basement if you need space." And the way she said "your room" made my skin crawl, because she meant the tiny spare bedroom where I had moved temporarily after letting them take the master bedroom, so the kids could have more space, a sacrifice I never complained about, because family mattered to me. My son Daniel walked in while she was speaking, holding a cup of coffee, and instead of shutting the conversation down or correcting her tone, he sighed and said, "Dad, it's just getting tight in here. Maybe you could stick to your room for a bit." And hearing those words broke something inside me, because this wasn't some borrowed house. This wasn't me overstaying my welcome. This house was mine, legally and fully, purchased decades before Melanie ever came into the picture. And I had opened its doors to them out of love, not obligation. I didn't respond immediately. I simply walked back to my room, sat down on the edge of the bed, and stared at the wall while anger, sadness, disbelief, and humiliation churned inside my chest. It wasn't the request that hurt the most, it was the entitlement behind it. The way they spoke as if I were a guest taking up space instead of the man who made their living situation possible. Over the next few days, the disrespect grew worse. Melanie would roll her eyes whenever I walked into a room. She would whisper loudly on the phone about how old people should stay out of the way. She even rearranged furniture and put my belongings in boxes without asking, saying, "We need a cleaner, more modern vibe." George, as if my existence ruined her aesthetic. Daniel, meanwhile, avoided confrontation, brushing everything off with, "She's stressed. She's overwhelmed. She didn't mean it," excuses that grew thinner and weaker each time. Then came the moment that shoved everything over the edge. I woke up one morning and walked toward the kitchen to make coffee, and before I could even step into the hallway, Melanie appeared like a guard on duty and snapped, "George, we talked about this. If you need anything, call one of us. Stop wandering around the house. It's uncomfortable for us." And that word, wandering, made me feel like a prisoner, like some elderly man who couldn't function without supervision, when in reality I had cooked, cleaned, worked, and cared for others my entire life. I remember inhaling deeply, trying to swallow the hurt, trying not to react out of anger, and I said quietly, "You know, Melanie, maybe we should have a serious conversation today." But she smirked, full of arrogance and confidence she hadn't earned, and replied, "There's nothing to talk about. This is our home now, and we need peace." And the moment she said, "our home," something inside me snapped back into place. Not anger, not bitterness, but clarity. I realized these 2 people thought they had me trapped, thought I was lonely enough, weak enough, or old enough to be pushed into silence, thought I would tolerate anything for the sake of keeping peace. What they didn't know, what they had completely forgotten, was that the house was still 100% in my name, paid off long before they moved in, and I still had every document proving it. So that afternoon, after they left to take the kids to school and run errands, I drove to my lawyer's office, a quiet, sharp woman named Alice Merrick. who had handled my estate planning for years, and I explained everything that had happened. She listened patiently, then asked, "George, how far do you want to take this?" And I told her the truth. I don't want revenge. I just want my dignity back, and she nodded, opening a folder and beginning to draft a notice with calm precision. By the time I returned home, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Control, strength, clarity. I waited until evening when they were all in the living room, laughing and eating takeout, the same living room I had apparently been banned from. When I stepped inside, Melanie looked annoyed, Daniel looked nervous, and she immediately said, "George, we talked about this. Please go back to your room." And for the first time in weeks, I didn't shrink. Instead, I walked right past them, sat down on the recliner, and said calmly, "Actually, we need to talk." And before either of them could complain, the doorbell rang. Melanie sighed dramatically and muttered, "Who's that now?" Before opening the door and freezing when she saw my lawyer standing there with a thin envelope in her hand. "Good evening," Alice said pleasantly, stepping inside. "I'm here on behalf of Mr. Thompson," and the room fell into shocked silence. She handed the envelope to Daniel, not Melanie, and said, "These are your official 30-day notices to vacate the premises." And Melanie's jaw fell open so wide I thought it might hit the floor. What? Vacate?" "This is our home," she shrieked, and Alice responded calmly, "No, ma'am. This property is solely owned by Mr. Thompson. Your names are not on the deed, the title, the mortgage, or any legal document. You have been residing here at his generosity, and he is under no obligation to continue housing you, especially after the verbal mistreatment he has endured." And with each word, Melanie's face grew redder, angrier, and more desperate. Daniel stood there stunned, holding the papers with trembling hands, whispering, "Dad, you're kicking us out?" And I looked him in the eye, the son I raised, the boy I taught to be respectful, the man I hoped would protect his family, and I said quietly, "No, son, you made this happen. I let you into my home out of love, not obligation, but you let your wife treat me like a burden in the house I built. And I won't live the rest of my life being disrespected where I'm supposed to feel safe." Melanie exploded, ranting about how I was heartless, how I was tearing the family apart, how she had rights, but Alice shut her down immediately, explaining the law, the ownership, the eviction timeline, and the consequences of refusing to comply. After she left, the house felt heavy, tense, suffocating. Daniel sat down and cried silently, whispering, "Dad, I'm sorry. I didn't know how bad it felt," and I placed a hand on his shoulder and told him, "I love you. But love doesn't mean letting people treat you like you're disposable." And though he nodded, I could see the shame in his eyes, shame for failing to stand up, shame for choosing peace over principle, shame for letting his father become invisible in his own home. Over the next few weeks, Melanie made daily scenes, slamming cabinets, muttering insults under her breath, trying to guilt-trip me, even teaching the kids to avoid me, but none of it worked. Because once a man finds his backbone again, no tantrum can bend it. Daniel eventually apologized again, quietly, sincerely, admitting he had let things slide too far, promising he would take responsibility for whatever came next. When moving day finally arrived, Melanie stormed through the house like a hurricane, shouting at the movers, crying dramatically, yelling at Daniel. But when she tried to confront me one last time, saying, "You'll regret this when you're old and alone," I simply replied, "I'd rather be alone than disrespected in my own home," and I meant every word. After they left, the silence felt enormous. Not sad, not empty, but peaceful, like the house was finally breathing again after months of tension. I cleaned the living room, opened the windows, made myself a cup of coffee, and sat exactly where I wanted to sit. Not in a bedroom someone tried to confine me to. Not hidden away like an inconvenience. But in my living room, in my home, living a life I had earned. And as sunlight streamed through the curtains, I realized something powerful. Getting older doesn't mean losing your voice, your rights, or your dignity. Sometimes. Getting older means remembering that you have the strength to take back everything someone tried to take from you, including your own peace. And on that quiet morning, In the house that still carried my wife's warmth and my own memories, I knew without a doubt that I had done the right thing, not just for myself, but for the man I raised who needed to see what self-respect truly looks like.